Tuesday, July 25th, 2023. Maneco 64, home of alternative economics and contrarian views. Today we're going to look at Japan and specifically the Japanese yen and how it's winning the race to the bottom. And it's not a good race, of course. That's what we're going to look at. Before I start, I'd like to look at a couple of developments. The first one is to do with the UK and UK public debt. FT is reporting this morning that UK to run up highest debt interest bill in developed world. Treasury on course to spend 10% of government revenue on bond costs this year, according to Fitch. Fitch is a rating agency, and these rating agencies are always behind the curve. So I would say it could get worse than 10%. That's akin to, let's say, someone on 50,000 pounds a year having to spend 5,000 pounds just on the interest on the debt that this person has, not the repayment of it, just the interest, to give you an idea. And here's this chart that compares the UK to other Western countries. You can see that the US is not that far behind. And on average, actually, Western European median is a lot lower than the US and the UK. And why is that? Well, I think it's because the ECB has been able to keep interest rates a bit lower, but I don't think that's going to last very long, to be honest. So I think that's a bad omen here for the UK and the whole Western world, for that matter, and the US included. The other thing I wanted to touch upon is the oil price. And I've been looking at this and talking about it for the last week or so. So I've looked at the technical picture for crude oil, WTI, and also Brent. And I was noting that we'd broken out of a falling wedge on the not just the short-term charts, but the monthly chart, like the one I'm looking at. And that's a very bullish technical formation. And if you look at crude oil longer term, back to like 2010, in 2021, we broke from a falling wedge, a much bigger falling wedge. And now we're breaking out from a much smaller falling wedge. And it's almost like it's a fractal, a smaller fractal of the bigger falling wedge. When we broke out of that big falling wedge in 2021, and the breakout was around $60, we went all the way up to $127 back in February of last year. And that was, of course, you could say it was because of the war in the Ukraine, but the technical chart was saying that something was going to happen. So falling wedges are usually consolidation patterns in a trend. The trend, of course, since crude oil hit negative, like negative $37.50 back in, I think it was April or May of 2020. And that was a freak incident because you couldn't deliver WTI crude in Oklahoma. So it was cheaper to get rid of the crude, to give the crude away than pay because you couldn't store it. This chart doesn't give that negative price, but you can see that it went from, on this chart about $7 to $127. So I would expect a huge move from where we are right now. And I would expect crude oil to top the high that we saw last year at 127. How long it's going to take? Maybe a year or two. And why is it happening? Well, we don't know. It could be any kind of event, any kind of geopolitical event. One that I saw the other day that could be pointing to some trouble in terms of the geopolitical situation is a tweet from Kathleen Tyson. And who's Kathleen Tyson? Well, she's a former central banker. She's and she's a market supervisor. She's on Twitter, and she noted a few days ago, and she wrote, "I privately predicted war against Iran when Biden called up 4,000 reservists and sent another 2,500 troops to occupied Syria. A lot of hardware moving to the Gulf. U.S. wants to refill the SPR, Strategic Petroleum Reserves." Yes, it's he's emptied that big time in order to bring down crude oil prices, and that's that falling wedge there by seizing Iranian oil fields. That's what she thinks, that U.S. is gonna find an excuse to go to war with Iran, and there's plenty of excuses. There's a lot of tension in the Persian Gulf. Iranian naval ships stopping tankers, international tankers, through the Strait of Hormuz. And she goes on to say the reason for Kissinger's trip to Beijing was to ask Xi and DM Li, Defense Minister Li Shangfu, to stand back and let them. U.S. cannot allow Russia, China, Iran, and Saudi unification. Well, that's the BRICS, and trading oil in other currencies. She could be right. I've been hearing about war with Iran for almost 20 years, and it never happens. But this might be the reason why crude is looking really bullish. Of course, it would be really bad for our Western economies. We still depend a lot on oil and hydrocarbons. Now we'll go back to Japan. And why am I looking at Japan? Well, it's interesting because the other day I was looking at the gold price in yen, and then I started looking at it in other currencies, and I went to fxtop.com, and I recommend that website. You can measure currencies versus gold instead of gold versus currencies. And what do I mean by that? Well, you can see how many grams one Japanese yen will buy instead of how many yen 1 ounce of gold will buy. And it gives you a negative chart. And then this morning, I looked at a comment from the live stream on Sunday, and it's from Ronnie2803, and I think Ronnie is in Japan because he wrote a comment in Japanese, which unfortunately I can't read, but he also wrote it in English, so I'll read it to you. And it's interesting because it's almost like he was reading my mind. He says, "Hey Mario, I have been listening to you for about a year or so, and you have become a staple of my day's news. A familiar voice that I would miss if I did not hear any more about the dollar becoming worthless and masses starting to barter in precious metals. Would this similar fate happen to the Japanese yen? Would Japanese people run around exchanging precious metals for things? Almost everyone can feel the extra pain of inflation, but not many seem to believe in gold or silver and that they can purchase it themselves to avoid the eventual end, which must be at least 5 years ahead of us. From my questions, they believe that they should all leave it to God and the Prime Minister of Japan. Maybe these Japanese civilians can't see it for not being able to understand English. Like the Lee May leaflets that USA so carelessly dropped all over Japan, warning them in English to evacuate or die from the atom bomb. Enola Gay. Nobody evacuated because not many could understand, and the minuscule that didn't know what to do, and so did nothing." And he goes on to say, "So I wonder, should I put myself in harm's way and warn them in Japanese? I don't think I should, because the first time I warned them, they almost threw me in jail, and I still haven't finished paying the huge fine they imposed on me for grievous hurt to their Japanese female treasonous treachery. Actually, I feel I would be quite comfortably happy physically and financially to not warn them again. But I wonder if history is repeating itself since once again our Japanese friends seem not to be aware of the buzz that is happening with the world's fiat currencies. But for sure their political ruling class know, but have not yet told them. I can swear that I see American strings as usual jerking Japanese body parts around randomly. Do you see it too? I do, Ronnie. I do, and it's unfortunate because I grew up in Brazil, and there's a big, I don't want to say colony, but there's a lot of Brazilians of Japanese descent, especially in the state of São Paulo. I remember even where I lived in Rio, when I started playing tennis, there was an old Japanese man that played tennis, and he used to play with me. He was very nice. He used to tell me to watch the ball, which in Portuguese is olha a bola. But he used to say ora a bola. So I always talk to my mom and my sisters about him. And and I went to Japan when I was 9. My dad had to travel a lot for business, and when we grew up, he used to take us along, and I really enjoyed Japan. And in London as well, I had a very good, 2 good colleagues at work at ABN AMRO. They were Japanese, and we used to work quite closely together. And maybe Yamada-san is watching this. So are the Japanese aware of what's happening to their currency? And it's interesting that you've asked me this question, because I follow the yen very closely, especially against gold, because it's actually the worst performing currency versus gold of the top currencies, fiat currencies, in the last 10 years.
With rising inflation, bank failures, and massive layoffs across multiple sectors, the future of the economy remains uncertain. It's no wonder the central banks have been getting prepared by stockpiling gold. At ITM Trading, we have spent over 27 years building a team of seasoned researchers and analysts who can help you prepare for any financial crisis. Our experts are ready to provide you with proven strategies to safeguard your wealth and assets in the event of an economic downturn or currency reset, which is frankly inevitable. Don't wait until it's too late. Schedule your free gold and silver strategy call by clicking on the link in the description below.
And I'm going to come to that in a minute, but what does that mean? Well, it means that the Japanese yen is losing more value than any other major currency. And it's interesting that even here in the West, I read an article a few weeks ago when the dollar was really getting hit hard. I think it was in the FT, and the writer said, well, investors are probably moving to the safe haven of the Swiss franc and the Japanese yen. And I laughed when he wrote that, or he or she. So are the Japanese public aware of this? Probably not. And they're not aware of it in other Western countries either. When you talk to the average person out there about gold and silver, they have no clue. Of course, there are those of you who have been following me for over 7 years who are aware of the fact that gold and silver are money, and our fiat currencies are going to continue to sink against them. Yes, they fluctuate, but eventually fiat currencies all go to zero. So why is Japan in such bad shape in terms of the currency? Well, you had the bubble, stock market bubble in the 80s and early 90s, and Japan has really never recovered. The Japanese government and the central bank, they've never let things correct. They've printed money, they've kept rates at zero or negative, they've done huge amounts of QE. And I've looked at some data since 2013. And why 2013? Maybe because 10 years, but it's also when Abenomics started. Abenomics really put QE and monetary money printing and yield curve control at the forefront. And also government spending. Yeah, the Japanese government has been deficit spending. And you look at the debt to GDP of Japan, it's approaching 300% of GDP. I think the Bank of Japan owns most of the JGBs. And the other thing about Japan is that the Japanese yen is a major international currency, and it actually helps the other Western countries. So, and how do they do that? Well, by something called the Japanese yen carry trade. So Western investors and banks, financial institutions, they can borrow for nothing in yen, and that means you're selling the yen, and then you buy other assets in dollars, pounds, or euros, and it keeps this everything bubble going. So the Japanese, unfortunately, the Japanese public, they're carrying the whole Western world, this whole Ponzi, and it's at the expense of their currency. So enough of what's happening. Let's look at the numbers. So first of all, I'm going to show you a chart of the price of gold in yen. So how many yen you can buy for 1 ounce of gold. And as you can see, we're almost at 280,000 yen. We're almost at an all-time high. And I think what's happening to the yen is going to happen to all the other currencies as well, because they're going to implement the same kinds of policy. And if you look back in 2008, at the height of the crisis that we had then, the price of gold in yen was 61,000. So the price of gold has gone up almost 5 times since that 08 crisis. And you can see that it really started accelerating back in 2019. But it's been, a constant debasement versus gold. And people might ask, why you measure against gold? Well, because that's what the central banks use to measure things. Why do you think a lot of the BRICS or emerging market countries are buying gold? Why do you think countries keep such big gold reserves? Of course, there are exceptions like Canada. So yeah, that's where we are in terms of the price of gold, in terms of yen. But more interestingly, I'm looking here at FX Top, and it gives you how many grams of gold you can buy with 1 yen. And I've done it since 24th of July, 2013 to the 24th of July, or yesterday. So that's 10 years. And you can see that the Japanese yen has lost 52% versus the gram of gold. And the same thing goes for silver. The Japanese yen has lost 41%. Gold has outperformed silver, of course, but it still dropped a lot. And to the FT person that wrote that article, that's the worst performing of the major currencies versus gold. But of course, the FT doesn't look at gold as money. So what's the second worst performing of the major Western currencies? Well, it's the Aussie dollar. Aussie dollar's dropped 50% in the last 10 years. Then we've got the Canadian dollar, that's dropped 47%. We've got the euro, that's dropped 43%. We got the pound, that's dropped 43%. And that's very interesting that the pound and the euro have performed exactly the same in terms of gold. Are we really not part of the euro in the UK? I know we got the pound, but it looks like they're managing those currencies, doesn't it? And the dollar, of course, has outperformed all the other major fiat currencies that we've looked here, but it's still down 32%. And I think the dollar and all these currencies are going to continue to sink. And I've been talking about that even before I started my channel. When I worked in the city, I wrote an article about the fact that all fiat currencies are sinking back in '07. And I think they're going to continue to sink. So whether Japanese people are going to be bartering with gold or silver, I don't know if that's going to happen. But I think a lot of the top people in Japan, a lot of wealthy Japanese are already probably accumulating gold, maybe silver. I can't tell you whether people will start bartering gold and silver, but it would be easier to barter in silver because gold is, you can't buy a loaf. You could buy a loaf of bread with gold, but it would be a minuscule amount. But you could do it with one of these, the bar monies, which I have here. That's a Japanese bar money. It's silver. And a little bit on the bar money. It says here from rectanglecoins.com, Japanese bar money. In 1599, Japan issued a rectangular gold piece known as the Gabu Ichibu. The regional issue from Ebo blossomed into a 250-year series and branched into more denominations, eventually spilling over into silver pieces in the mid-1700s. These rectangular pieces are sometimes referred to as bar money for their unusual bar-like shape. They were minted through 1869 when Japan's old currency system was replaced by the yen. Maybe bar money will come back to Japan. So, yeah, and they're not going to stop this because it's the only way to keep the Ponzi scheme going, the debt going. And Japan, unfortunately, they're doing as they're told, the Japanese officials. And we know why, because the U.S. is still present in Japan militarily, and I'm not saying this to disparage Japan, but it's still a colony. It does as it's told by its masters in Washington, D.C. So there you go. Let's quickly look at where the markets are this morning. It's 8:35 a.m. London time. So we've got spot gold at 1961. It's up about $6. The high's been 64, the low 53. Silver is trading at 24.50, is up about 15 cents. High's been 60, the low 25. The Dow futures is down 28. Nasdaq future is up 20, and the S&P futures they're unchanged. To the currencies, to the fiat currencies that will keep sinking against gold and silver, but versus each other, they seem to they distract people, to be honest. So pound is up 0.2 at 128.54. The euro is up 0.15 at 110.80. The dollar's down slightly versus the yen here at 141.30. And the dollar's down 0.2% versus the yuan at 714.19. Aussie dollar is up 0.5%, 67.68. The dollar is down slightly versus the Canadian dollar, 131.59. And the Kiwi dollar is up an eighth at 62.12. To the commodities, and crude oil is quite strong. We are approaching 80 in the WTI contract. It's at 78.66. It is down slightly, virtually unchanged. And Brent crude, of course, is at 82.50. That's unchanged as well. And I've noticed that wheat and corn have been rising quite sharply, and that's not good either. And it looks like commodities, general commodities, are on their way back after the consolidation we've had, just like crude. Platinum, that's trading at 967. That's up $7. So platinum seems to be picking up. Of course, $1,000 will be the next target for platinum. Copper, that's up 1% at 390. Yeah, and $4 is the key level there. So let's quickly look at the bond markets. The 10-year yield, U.S. Treasury yield, that's at 388. That's up a couple of basis points overnight. The 2 years up 2 basis points at 486. To the UK government bond market, looks like they're trying to keep the 2-year yield below 5. It's trading right around 499. And it's up 5 basis points. The 10-year is at 430, up 5 basis points as well. So with that, I'm going to wish you all a very good day. Take care. Bye.